Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Stuart Mullins, a partner in the firm's corporate team, and I'm joined today by Nicky Larkin, a director of succession planning. And between us, we're going to explore a number of routes for a business to exit. And Nicky is going to take us through some practical tips on readying the business itself for sale.
Yeah, thank you. Good to be here today, Stuart. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, no, thank you for joining us. So, in terms of an overview of what we're looking to cover off in today's webinar, I will talk around the different routes to exit, and by that I mean the different types of sale of a company or business, trade, management, buyouts, and the increasingly popular route of employee ownership. And Nicky will then take us through succession preparation and the importance of managing the timelines, Nicky.
Absolutely.
Talking about how to maximise the enterprise value for the business given the business time cycle, and also how to understand and get the mechanics of the transaction itself right to maximise that value. So when we talk about the sale of a business, they will generally take one of three avenues. You will either sell the business to a competitor, or you will sell it to the existing leadership team, or what we've seen over the last couple of years, a rise in being able to sell the company into a trust for the benefit of the employees. And I'll take you through the general overviews of trade sales, management buyouts, and employee ownership in this presentation. So when we talk about the trade sale, we're ultimately talking about the disposal of either the underlying business and assets of the undertaking, an asset sale, or indeed the sale of the shares in a corporate, being the instruments of title and the true reflection of how the company's owned. Now, typically, when a business is sold, the implications as to whether or not an asset sale or share sale route are followed are driven predominantly because of tax. Something called 2P, which stands for the transfer of undertaking regulations, and also what's going to happen with the leftover shell of a business if the assets are sold but the corporate entity still remains. And generally speaking, when shares are sold, the whole business is transferred away, owned and managed by different proprietary owners, but the underlying core of the business is wrapped up in the umbrella, and it's the umbrella that's disposed of. Quite often you'll find that sellers will prefer that route because they can and often benefit from greater tax benefits on a share sale than they can for an asset sale. So they get the benefit of the sale consideration themselves. Whereas if a business sells the underlying assets and goodwill, it's that corporate wrapper that still owns those assets and on disposal is entitled to the income and consideration for the disposal, which means that it's then an issue for those founders to extract in the most tax efficient way they possibly can that value in that wrapper.
What's really important here is for that transaction, it's such a major difference on how it can be sold. So any changes of how you're going to do that or structure changes, you really need to be looking at that a couple of years ahead of the sale, really, don't you? To really optimize it. So if you're not sure what exit route, definitely talk to your advisors ASAP so you've got chance to do any changes to structure in time for a sale.
I think that's absolutely right, Nicky. And of course, there are timelines in and around 2P if you are looking to sell the assets. Employees have rights to automatically transfer across where their employment's directly related to that underlying asset that's being disposed of. So, in addition to a sale of assets or shares to a competitor, another route to exit is through the management buyout process. And what we're talking about here is identifying key leaders within the existing management structure who may well want to come on and take the business forward whilst also paying you as a seller your goodwill and entitlement out to take on the benefit of the business. Now, in my experience, it's really important to take advice early and really explore with someone like succession planning who those individuals will be. And it's normally more than one, because the funding of that purchase will require some pretty cleverly worked out funding option. You will generally want more than one within the team to take the business forward and hold the glue of the enterprise together for the remaining staff. And in terms of funding, we often see a combination of debt finance, which by that we mean going to a bank, those buyers putting up their houses or using their own personal wealth to part fund. What we call vendor finance, where the sellers are allowing for a deferred period of time to receive the full value of money so that profits can be earned and generated in the company and used to fund that exit.
And that's quite popular if the managers don't want to risk their own assets.
Yes.
So can work for some purchasers.
Absolutely right. And in certain businesses you might get private equity involvement where an equity house will own a business or a number of businesses and see value in acquiring your business, adding that to the existing pot with a view to growing something much larger and exiting in 5 years. And they're quite keen in that structure to provide funding to the existing or succession management team to build that new conglomerate and objective.
Yeah, that's an area that a lot of people don't really understand at all, but actually can work really, really well. But the key thing to think about there is usually the private equity people are investing in the team. So it is important really to have a team in that particular time and to show that it is a strong team, because that's what they're investing in, not just the business.
Very much so. No, thank you. And then this concept, this other buzzword that you find in our world, mezzanine finance, which really is a combination of debt and vendor finance that's used to provide funding. So management buyouts with the right team, with the right succession in place, I think Nicky will agree, are an attractive route.
Yeah, and it's really great to be able to do that because you feel like that, your culture and everything hopefully will be continued with the management team, so it's good continuation.
Yeah, you've got the continuity there, but you also have this issue about how you're going to get paid for your business on day one.
Yeah, it doesn't always work.
And employee ownership is, as I say, is a sort of third element that's come out over the last couple of years, where the sellers of a business can sell a qualifying interest in their underlying trading company to a trust for the benefit of all of the employees as a whole. These are quite popular for the reasons buyouts are popular. You have the succession and continuity of the leadership team and the founders being involved in the business, you don't necessarily come across the issues around funding because they are self-funded. By that, we mean that they are funded through surplus profit on day one of a transaction, and then there's a deferred consideration element where future profits are applied to pay out those sellers over a period of time. They can be very tax advantageous for those selling shareholders. They are considered tax neutral, which means that you don't pay income or capital gains tax on the disposal of your business to a ownership trust. There are issues around finance. You really, for these to work, need some distributable profits on day one, or you need the ability of a bank to provide you with some money on day one in order to take any value out on completion. And you have to understand that the rules around disposing into employee ownership require the seller to sell for a fair market value, which if you were to sell to a competitor, you might get a larger multiple on the sale price.
Yeah, you really need to understand what you're doing there. So you need good advisors. Stuart's done loads of these transactions. There was a bit of a delay when they were first brought in because people were waiting to see what other people were going to do and how they were going to work. But now there's been a much bigger search and Stuart's got huge experience in that. So always talk to someone that really knows what they're doing, because if they don't, then it's not going to work. You could find that the tax advantages may not actually happen if you haven't had it set up correctly.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Nicky. They're not just from a tax perspective, but in terms of ensuring the legacy and succession of the business will continue perhaps beyond you through that structure is very important to safeguard your ultimate plan and rationale for going through the process. So we've talked about the various routes to exit through either an asset sale or a share sale to a competitor. We've looked very briefly in a management buyout what it means and explored some of the funding issues, and we've given you a very brief overview of employee ownership and why that can be considered attractive as well. Despite any route that you go through in order to transfer the business, there are a set stage of steps. I think Nicky will agree.
Yeah, lots of similarities through each process.
That we go through, really. And the first is due diligence, and that's as a buyer asking all sorts of questions about the operational performance of the business. Are the employees under contract? Do they have covenants in place to prevent them leaving competitors? Are there any issues that are going to affect the underlying business on a sale or that are reasonably foreseeable? Is the business in any sort of financial difficulty? Are there issues around supply chain and customer contracts? And then we proceed to a sale and purchase agreement, and the sale and purchase agreement documents the underlying transaction, but will contain warranties and representations in favour of a seller, in favour of a buyer.
Hopefully it's in favour of both of them and it's a fair agreement. That's what we'd hope.
That's right. In favour of the buyer, and they make assumptions about the condition of the business and the underlying performance. And if those representations are not correct, then a purchaser will come along and enforce the contract through the laws of misrepresentation. So as a seller, it's really important to review those warranties and understand them, and through the process of a disclosure letter, give an explanation as to why those unqualified statements of fact cannot be given. And also to build into the sale and purchase agreement protections around the amounts that you can be pursued for, the time limit that you're at risk for, and what we call a basket claim, a threshold that needs to be achieved before you can be liable for a breach of warranty or representation. And then once the process is itself completed, there are generally post-completion filing requirements, and those will relate to notifying customers, talking with employees, as well as dealing with governance issues at Companies House, and also perhaps notifying the revenue with regards to any share options that have been exercised as a result of the transaction.
Indeed, and a lot of those things have to be done within a very certain amount of time, don't they? So it's a good idea to, before the transaction finishes, put together like a 100-day plan so you know exactly when all those things have to happen.
That's absolutely right. Be clear on who's doing what. In any transaction, I have lots of different advisors who will always be doing their bits and pieces, but there can be some overlap.
Yeah.
And just being clear with everybody as to who's taking ownership of what.
Especially if it's a seller that has to do anything, because they could be off on their world cruise by that point. So you need to make sure anything like bank mandates and all that make sure they're all signed before completion.
That's a very, very good point. So in terms of our practical tips for readying your business for sale, we talked about due diligence, and that's really having a critical evaluation of your business well before you get involved in the sale process. And your advisors can help you look at your structure, make sure that all your Companies House filings are correct, be clear that your forecasts and budgets are up to date and accurate, and are sensible. Make sure that all the intellectual property that you think you own through trademarks, domain names, websites, software, be clear on who owns what you license, what you own, and key terms around those documents are succinctly recorded. Being clear with employees and management as to their purpose in the business, ensure that their employment contracts are up to date, ensure that they do have appropriate covenants and restrictions in place to protect the business. Be clear with them about any option plans, understand and remember the exercising conditions that may well exist in any option plans that you have given. Don't necessarily rely on strings of emails if you've got key customers' contracts. Try and put those contracts into a single document. Understand if there are any change of control provisions that may well give rise to a termination right if you sell your business. All of those things are really important and can be tackled well ahead of the game in order to maximise the value and streamline the transaction process.
And also, as a seller, you want to make sure that stuff is all in order well before the transaction happens, because you don't want the buyer to get worried during the due diligence process if something's not in order and they change their mind completely. It's not just about trying to reduce the price. It could end up the deal not happening if they think that, why is this not in order?
That's a very, very, very good point. Make sure that you understand your sales contract. Be very clear on what you've warranted in those against those representations that are in the back of the agreement. Understand and make sure that your advisors take you through the difference between a warranty claim and what we call an indemnity claim. You shouldn't really be signing up to general indemnities in any sale contract. They should be very, very specific, because the consequences of the value that you could be liable for a breach of indemnity and a breach of a contractual warranty are very, 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 very different.
It's when you normally talk about the pen, isn't it?
Yes, I have a simple example. If I sell Nicky this clicker for £50 and I warrant that it will do a certain thing, if the clicker doesn't do that certain thing, Nicky can sue me for £50, but if she could have sold the clicker in that state to another party for £25, the most she can sue me for a breach of contract is £25, and that's because under the laws of England and Wales, a injured party is under a duty to mitigate their loss. If I indemnify to Nicky that this clicker will do a certain thing and sell it to her for £50, Nicky can sue me for the £50 and gets to keep the clicker itself. So it's a silly example, but I think it highlights in simple terms the difference between an indemnity liability and a warranty liability. So when would I see people give indemnities? Well, I see them give indemnities when there is a clear and specific issue identified in a due diligence process, such as perhaps a historic potential corporation tax liability or a PAYE liability, where we can then undertake some research and analysis as to what that loss could be, and limit that indemnity specifically to that particular item.
What's quite common at the moment is research and development credits, because there's been so much so many reviews, inquiries on them from HMRC. That's often the thing that is actually getting looked into.
That's a very good point, Nicky. That's a very good point. But as we say, you really must talk to your advisors about the importance of indemnification versus a warranty claim, and understand the two, so that you protect yourself as a seller post transaction, and also manage expectation if a buyer, that you will have people like me say you shouldn't really be asking for general indemnities because it's not considered market practice, and it's an unfair exposure to risk, where that risk can be quantified and perhaps dealt with before selling completion. Anyway, that's an overview. I touched briefly on the importance of disclosure. When you are putting together that document that benchmarks or provides qualification to the representations in terms of warranties and indemnity, there is a concept of fairly disclosed. The definition of disclosure is very important. You shouldn't go beyond, if you're a seller, to do more than fairly disclosed, and you should avoid any subjective language around the definition of disclosure, which could give rise to a discussion about whether a buyer ought to be aware of a particular issue in disclosure, or whether in fact they are. So again, really important that you talk to people that are experienced in negotiating these contracts and understand what's a reasonable position for both the seller and purchaser's perspective, in order to ensure the transaction goes through as smoothly and as efficiently as it possibly can. Well, that's enough from me. Thank you for listening. I'm now going to hand you over to Nicky. He's going to take us through some of the more interesting and less dry areas of the sale mechanics, and give you some practical tips on how to plan and engage in the process.
Super, thank you, Stuart. No, that was really good because I always learn something new each time when you take me through those things. So I'm going to take you firstly through the timeline of a sale, because a lot of people don't really realise just how long or the different parts that are involved in the sale. So obviously Stuart's been through the parts that are once you've got your offer and you're into exclusivity, but there's quite a lot of different things to do beforehand. So first of all, you obviously have to decide that you want to sell your business. If you're a single owner, that's makes the decision much simpler because it's only yourself that you've got to persuade that this is the right time. If you're in a larger organisation where you've got multiple owners, it is going to be a bit more of a complicated process to decide are you all ready for the sale or not. So once you have decided that you are ready to sell, you typically would look at thinking about how can you find a buyer. Now I'm talking about, if remember right at the beginning of Stuart's sides, you had the share sale or an MBO or employee ownership trust. In this situation, we're generally talking about the either the asset or share sale. It could be either, but you actually are selling it to a third party. Usually, we'd always whoever your broker is, hopefully they will have said, well, are you sure there isn't somebody in your team that you want to do a management buyout to, or the options of an employee ownership trust. But once you've just decided either perhaps your management team aren't too experienced or they don't want the risk, or perhaps they just haven't got the means in order to purchase for the right market price, then you're looking for a third party sale. So at that point you need to instruct, it's a good idea to instruct a broker, because firstly, to maximise your price by doing a full marketing of your business. And of course, is the option to instruct succession planning, which is in box 1.
And that's really important. I've known businesses that have tried to get their business ready and prepared for sale, not really understanding what they should be selling for, and then trying to work out how much they think it's worth to a buyer, rather than having a good analysis of the market and making sure they are maximising that value, which
absolutely
professionals like you can deliver.
Yeah, absolutely, because we see sales in the different sectors every week, so we can see what the market is currently bearing. There's obviously different methodologies to valuations, and you can obviously, on paper, a business can look one way, but if the market isn't wanting to purchase at the moment, or they are buying for a lower multiple, for example, it could be because when the interest rates went up a lot this year, so a lot of people sort of stood back a bit from their acquisition agenda because they knew it was going to cost a bit more, so they wanted to wait for the interest rates to settle down. So there's lots of other things that can happen to find when it's the right time, which I'll talk a bit more about on my next slide as well, the right time. But if hopefully you've also prepped your business for sale, because that's the other thing, which it is if you really don't know how to prep it, a lot of people do bring in an NED or a business growth advisor well before this point, so that they can know that their business is in the best shape it possibly can be for the sale.
There's a lot of emphasis on preparation here.
Absolutely.
To maximise value on an exit. This is not the sort of thing that you can do in a couple of weeks. You really should give yourself a very, very good lead time to get the best possible price you can.
Absolutely. Obviously people can sell very quickly, but that usually is an indication of desperation and a bad situation, which of course that then will affect the sales price. It's just like, if you were selling your home, most people are used to buying and selling homes, so that's a transaction people are more familiar with. If you're just putting it on the market and you're comfortable wait for the right buyer, then of course hopefully you're going to maximise the price. If you're absolutely desperate for money and you put it into an auction, generally it's gonna go for a lower price. So, because you're having to be very quick about it. It's unusual that you're going to maximise the price in sort of an auction type thing. So in this situation, what we'd like to do is we always try and market to the full market. So all potential buyers, we talk with the seller of who the potential buyers could be. So it could be private equity, like we've mentioned before. It could be a trade sale, so somebody else in the sector that is trying to grow their market share. It may actually be somebody completely new and are trying to diversify into that sector. So there's a variety of different potential places that people that could, entities generally, that are wanting to purchase. But by assigning a broker, they can look across the whole market and make sure that you've got the best chance of a good sales price. So typically what would happen is you normally spend a month or so working with your advisor to put together all the right information so that it can be the business can be marketed correctly. It's really important to be careful with the information that you're putting in to that marketing, because some of that will be brought up within your due diligence process. So this is not the time to overinflate numbers, or be over optimistic things. You need to have facts. It's absolutely fine if you're putting forecasts and things in as well, because obviously everybody does understand that forecasts can go up and down, but on your actual figures, you need to be putting the right figures
It's
in.
also important to be careful about confidentiality.
Absolutely.
You don't really want to be exposing your trade secrets and sensitive commercial data.
Yes, indeed.
At that stage necessarily.
Yeah, so you really want to put as little information in the teaser document as possible. It needs to be enough to attract the buyers, but you don't want to give confidential information out, but you also don't want to make it obvious of who you are either. So in the teaser document, that is something that could go to anybody and it will be anonymised. And then what would happen is people that go and see the teaser and say, oh yes, I think that's quite interesting. Yes, Stuart, I'd like to have a look at that. Then you would, with the seller, discuss, okay, are you happy to get an NDA signed with them? So a non-disclosure agreement, really important. And then if you're happy for them to have a non-disclosure agreement signed, then you can start giving them more detailed information so they can make a decision about, is this something that they want to start having conversations with? Now, trying to find those potential buyers typically take 2 to 3 months. It can take a bit longer, depending on the sector, depending on how buoyant it is. Sometimes it can take a shorter period of time. There are certain sectors that are very active with acquisitions. The tech sector is, accountancy sector, but then you've got others that just aren't, so it's much more difficult to sell. So you've just got to plan that could take a longer period of time. The next point is that a good broker will have really good conversations with those potential buyers. So hopefully you can just carry on growing your business or working your business, because that's the other thing that you don't want to happen, is start to go through the sales process and just neglect your business, because then you're going to have a depreciating asset and you want to be actually still have a good asset to sell there. So your broker should be talking to the buyers, looking at what are they interested in, is this potentially a good fit for an acquisition, are they a qualified buyer? That's the other key thing as well, because you don't want to waste your seller's time. So that can usually take about 2 to 3 months, again, depending on the availability of the buyers. Then what we hope would happen is you would look at the best offers or the best potential buyers and start having some buyer meetings between the seller and the buyer. Now, this is where, a really involved buyer, involved broker, which, Succession Planning is a nice boutique firm that really gets involved. They will actually sit in all those meetings with you. Because, you might buy and sell your house several times, different houses. With a business, most business owners, they build up their business. It might have even gone through a couple of generations to your family. You're only selling it once. You can only sell it once. Plus, also, it may be the only time you actually sell a business. Yes, of course, there's some serial entrepreneurs, but they are in the minority. Generally, you're selling a family business, or a business that's growing further than that. But it could be the only time you're involved in this type of sales. So you're not. It's often the seller is not sure what they should be disclosing or not, like you were saying before in those disclosure part of your talk. So that's where it's really good if you have got a broker that or a consultant that holds your hand through that process to really make sure that you're giving the best version of yourself for the sale, but also being very careful on what you're actually saying. Once you've decided who the best potential buyer is from the offers, I'll talk this a bit more in detail later on, but not every offer is easy to compare. You might just think, 1.5 versus 1 million. Of course, the 1.5 million is better, but actually the structure of the deal could mean that it's actually worth less, which I'll talk a bit more a bit later. So you really need to be careful which one you're selecting. At that point, once you've decided who your preferred buyer is, that's when you discuss your heads of terms. It's probably at the time when you start talking to Stuart or someone in his team, and you then go into exclusivity. As soon as you've signed your heads of terms, you're going into exclusivity. Now, what that means is the firm is no longer being marketed. You can't go and have simultaneous conversations with other buyers at the same time. You're making a commitment that you do want to sell to that buyer. And if you don't, there could be some financial penalties or legal consequences if you don't adhere to that exclusivity.
And it's a point that always comes up. It's, well, how long should that exclusivity be, Nicky? Now, I tend to say to people, no, never more than 90 days. 60 days, 90 days is reasonable, because if you're a seller, you don't want to be stuck in protracted negotiations, unable to go and explore other opportunities if you feel the deal isn't going to move forward. And similarly, from a buyer's perspective, most sellers are pretty reasonable. If you're getting towards the end of exclusivity and significant progress has been made, they're more than happy to grant an extension. Absolutely.
No, I completely agree. I always try to go for 2 to 3 months. Occasionally, if it is over the Christmas period, you might give an extra couple of weeks because of the Christmas period. But otherwise, 3 months is a really good guide, definitely. And if you haven't got incentivized buyers and sellers, yes, you can make the process really drawn out. But you've also got to question, why are they taking such a long time? Are they just kicking tires just trying to find different information, and then they really not actually serious buyers and all serious sellers if they're taking this long? Because even the biggest deal, if you're sure about it happening, you can make these deals happen. If you've got the right lawyers and the right advisors, the deals can happen. Yes, if you appoint the wrong solicitors and they drag their feet, it's probably because they're not proper commercial solicitors. They don't do that every time. Whereas good commercial solicitors will they'll be completely familiar with like the SPAs, the general clauses and everything, and they'll get through it all very, I wouldn't say quickly, they'll get through it thoroughly, but promptly. Efficiently, absolutely. So that sort of then really ties in exclusivity of up to 3 months with getting all your lawyers and advisors to the final sales purchase agreement and performing the due diligence. Now, again, due diligence, I am always nervous when people say it's going to take a long time. I've been involved in some very large sales, and a good due diligence team will get everything done within a couple of weeks. There's absolutely, if the information's available. If the information's not available, as the buyer, you've got to question, actually, do you is the seller really the right one for you anyway? If they can't get it together.
And that's a very good point, Nicky. If you're going to undertake due diligence on a business and you're a buyer, if the information is there and you are able to process it efficiently, then it can be a quick process. But what you often need is somebody who's able to look at the financial projections, an accountant. You will need somebody to ensure that the tax position of the business is correct and has been correctly dealt with, and that's in respect of all taxes. You'll need to make sure that you've got an appropriately qualified legal team in place that can review things like data protection, employees, property, understand your the supply contracts and customer contracts. So putting that first team into position and getting them ready to go to bat is really, really important to ensure a smooth due diligence process. And again, from a selling perspective, readying a data room, having all the information that you think you're going to be asked for to hand, so that you're not stuck because people are on Christmas holidays when you're waiting for the latest set of management accounts to be produced, for example, or people are dealing with delays generally. But talking to your advisors and getting your team ready early is very, very beneficial to both sellers and buyers.
Absolutely. And it's always good if you have got your financial due diligence team and your legal due diligence team that have worked together before, because although they've got different purposes, there's often quite a lot of overlay. So it's really important that if the financial team spots something that the legal team need to be aware of, and vice versa, that really helps if they work together, because often they are looking at some of the same documents. So that works really well. But if you're organised, that can be done. It's got to be done thoroughly, but it can be done, in a good time frame. Also, you've got to remember that some of these things aren't done consecutively. They can be done at the same time. So you can be working on your final SPA at the same time as finishing off the due diligence. Some people don't want to do that, some buyers, because they're thinking, I don't want to spend the money on the solicitors for the SPA if I haven't got the due diligence and that falls down. But if everything's looking right, just get on with it. Just get all the processes in place and do it at the same time. Then the other thing you're thinking, so just for that point, from you've probably spent a couple of years prepping your business. Then you've spent it's typically 9 to 12 months to get from instructing your broker to signing your SPA. Then you've also got to think, how long is the buyer going to want you to stay in the business? Some buyers will be they don't want you interfering and they won't want you. But that is unusual. Generally, they'll at least want you around for 6 months. If there's an earn-out, you're probably actually going to be tied in for 2 to 3 years, sometimes even longer. So again, you've got to think, when you're selling, that can be quite a long period if you're prepping for sale. This is also the thing I always say. When's the best time to start preparing to sell? The day you set up your business. Yeah. Second best time, today. Because that process, you thought, a couple of years to prep your business, a year to sell it, a couple of years to actually fully get out of it, you're talking 5 years there. So it's a long period of time. And that's right. Having a very clear idea on what you're going to do when you exit and be prepared, and what you're prepared to do as a seller going forward is absolutely key, and have those difficult conversations early with the buyer, so that the position's aligned and not being dealt with on the at the 11th hour. Yeah, and you've got to be aware that sometimes things don't work. I've been involved in sales that have taken a matter of 2 or 3 months, and sometimes the best conditions happen and it works like that. Other instances, I was involved in a sale, it actually faltered 3 times. So actually the whole period from starting off the negotiations to finally getting the right buyer and it completing took near enough 3.5 to 4 years. And that's just that main bit. So, you can have an overall plan, but if you are very set that, you want to retire at 50 or 60 or 65, or you've got some other project that you're wanting to do once you've sold, you really need to be putting in some contingency into that timeline. You've got the clicker. Can you click on next, please, Joe? Lovely. Excellent. So this all goes nicely into when is the right time to sell. So your businesses, the right time to sell also does depend sometimes on the sector. You'll see on here that we're talking about businesses right from the very beginning, so the seed and the development of the business, right to the maturity and the exit. That line, actually, that yellow graph, actually should almost really start dipping down, because there are some businesses that will have matured so much they will be on the decline. There will be, the big coffee shops, they're in a bit of a downward state at the moment because there's less stuff on the high street or whatever. There's various different ones that are on the downward spiral. WeWorks, that went really hugely up to several billion. It's now just gone bankrupt. So it's you've got to sell at the right point.
And I guess technology as well, Nikki.
Absolutely.
Technology has a finite period of time before
Indeed.
it becomes obsolete, and that also is important too.
So it's really key to be thinking about where you on this curve to when is the best time to sell. So if you are in a technology, actually the huge optimism and everything on the technology is often actually in the seed development startup stage. So that's where you see the really big players like Microsoft and Google, Twitter. That's when they do often buy businesses really at the early stage, when it's almost sometimes just that, might even be pre-revenue, but they're buying the technology, they're buying the IP. So that's that they can be crazy multiples. There's not even a set graph for that kind of stuff. But so you've got that in the technology, but what you'll generally find in a lot of businesses, it will be more in the sort of growth and establishment stage that often is a really good time to sell, because you're still looking that there is potential growth, because you can also think, why is the buyer wanting to buy you? One, they're growing their market share, but they're not going to want to buy something that's a declining asset. They want to have something that's still got potential. The classic thing is, for example, say in the marketing sector, you might have a private equity firm that's backing a management team that are building up a large marketing agency, and they might have, the core agency buy several small ones, and they might be buying them at sort of a 4 to 5 multiple, for example. But what they're doing is then getting it to that bigger stage, so really getting into that growth and establishment and expansion, so that then they can sell it for 8 times. That's what they're trying to do. So, it's thinking about when is the best time for you. The best way to do that and find out when is the best time is to talk to advisors. See what is the market looking like. There may not be a market if you're at certain stages. So you've got to understand when is the best time. Really important. Next clicker, please, Jo. Thank you. Super. So this is when I just wanted to talk about sort of the general mechanics of the deal. So what we're doing here is talking about, we've talked about all the structure of the deal, parts of the deal. This is when you're talking about sort of the structure of the deal. So it's the sales price. It's when are you going to be paid and what are you going to be paid? Are you going to be paid a consultancy, for example? There's lots of different parts of that deal, and that's when you've really got to understand what you want. This is the point that I would normally say, and this is probably even before you start the whole sales process. What are you wanting to do post-sale? So what do you want to try and get out of the deal? If you're saying, right, this has got to be my full pension, this has got to like last me for 40 years, you might have a certain figure in mind that you're going to need. You might need to discuss with an IFA of what that sort of number is going to be. That doesn't mean your business is going to sell for that figure, of course. You might have to still do a lot of changes to the business for it to be worth that fee that you need. It could be that you just need, you've already got your pension sorted. It might be that actually you're happy if it just pays off your mortgage. There's different levels of what the deal will look like that you'll be happy with. And it is really good. Whenever I talk to a person thinking about selling, I talk to them, well, what do you want? Sometimes that means when you say, actually, reality is, say they need 3 million. And actually you say, well, actually, even in the best market, your business is probably only worth 1.5. So what have they got the decision then? They either take the 1.5 and have to go and do something else, or they spend a bit more time growing the business even further so it can be worth 3 million. So you've got to think about the right time. So it's the time, it's how much, it's how is it going to be paid? Sometimes, if it's being sold to a big place, sometimes you get shares as well as actual cash, and sometimes that can work for you. But you've really got to understand what it is. If you're needing the cash and therefore the shares are just not going to work, you've got to think about what it is. So getting the mechanics, understanding what structure you want, making sure you've got the right team in place. That's the other thing. Getting the right advisors around you. I would just say that's just my final thing. But think very carefully, what are you aiming for? As I've said before, you can't sell that business again. So think about what you're aiming for. Make sure you have the right people around you so you can achieve that.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Nicky. That's been very helpful. It's always a pleasure to welcome you to our office and have our conversations around the intricacies of selling and managing businesses and business ownership. So thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us. And I hope you have a wonderful Christmas.
Absolutely. Any questions as well that you have, please do contact us. We'd love to hear from you.